just in case. Okay, so today's lecture will be a continuation of last week's, where we talk about what sort of things an economist might use to argue in favor of a particular policy or issue. And a lot of times you might notice what we're going to, like, what can you control? If you're let's say you're an economist and you're writing all these theories and you have all these, doing all this research and you're submitting it to all these journals, you might ask yourself, what the heck am I doing? What's the point of all this? Who can I actually influence with my research and my opinions? You're not really going to convince individuals to do anything differently based on your research, but you may be able to speak to the governments of the world. And so a lot of this will be geared toward what sort of government intervention may be helpful or harmful. You know, what sort of stuff would an economist say is a goal that a government can promote? And I mentioned this last week. We spent a lot of time talking about efficiency. I gave you this water fountain example because if the government is the thing that's allocating the water fountains, and they have this notion of efficiency in mind, the best thing to think about is, of course, when marginal cost equals marginal benefit, that you want to increase the number of fountains if the marginal benefit is greater than the marginal cost. But once it flips, that marginal cost is larger than marginal benefit, that's when you want to stop. So at $600 per fountain, that was between 5 and 6. So you go up to 5 and then you stop, because at that point the benefit is less than the cost. Okay, but that's one concept of efficiency. In other words, the efficient allocation of taxpayer money to water fountains depends on the benefits received by the citizens and the cost of the water fountains, and MB equals MC is a good way to go up to that point. Keep going up to the point MB equals MC. Okay, that's government allocation. Later on, I think we argued that this applies not just to government allocation, but to markets. That markets can be efficient, and that we have a special term for where they've sort of maximized their efficiency in terms of the trade surplus they generate, and that's called competitive equilibrium, if you remember. So we have those concepts: efficiency, MB equals MC, and in the government, and also in private markets where it's equilibrium. So I think I skipped this a bit, but I want to separate, when we're talking about the entire economy here, what is what the concept of efficiency can actually be. It depends. What type of efficiency are you talking about? So let me try to be as clear as I can about these two different types of efficiency. This first one is called productive efficiency, and that means the economy is using all of its resources to make the goods efficiently. In other words, no more of any good can be made without giving up some of another. If your economy is doing this, you say it's achieving productive. The word here is production, to produce things, to produce goods and services. It's not wasting any of its resources that it could have been using to make something. You know, if you imagine like a big factory that's just empty and no one's using it, and there's labor that could be working in the factory, and there's capital that could be used to make an investment in this factory a minute ago. If that's possible, but it's just not happening for some reason, then you could easily argue, internet connection. How's my internet connection?
It's fine.
Okay, I got a warning that said it was unstable. I'm glad if you can hear me, that's good. Okay, so that's what production efficiency is. It actually, so the first bullet point here is the definition. The second sub bullet point is not a definition, but it's an implication. It's implied that each good is produced at the lowest average cost given the resources or inputs spent on that good and other goods. Okay, so in this case, I don't know if you guys have taken, if you've taken 2 semesters of microeconomics, I think you will have spent several weeks leading to this conclusion that in a long run equilibrium, the markets are productive, have this productive efficiency because it hits the lower point on the average cost, the long run average cost curve, and all the capital and labor that could be used in whatever ways is doing it as efficiently as possible. We should think of it, this case, as lowest cost. Okay, so productive efficiency, it's just some of this lofty goal that economists may have and may say, well, we want to support policies that maybe they don't get us all the way to productive efficiency, but closer is better. We can all agree it's better to have the factory being used to make something rather than just sitting there empty, or I don't know if that's necessarily the right, the right size factory. Don't build a really large factory if you don't need it to produce a little widgets. And also don't build a really small factory if it would have been better to build a larger factory to build cars or airplanes or yachts or something like that. It's about whatever resources we have, we're using them the best way we can to make goods. That's called productive efficiency. Okay. Time to go to the next bullet point, allocative efficiency. This is a little bit different because in order to think about allocative efficiency, it's another goal for economists, but that's not about how you produce goods, but it's which goods and which services are you producing? And what does it mean for the economy to achieve allocative efficiency? It means it's producing exactly those goods and services which are demanded by consumers. I mean, the definition I've written stops there, but the continuation of that is the way in which they demand these goods and it's sort of their willingness to pay for these goods on the margin is exactly equal to the cost of producing these goods on the margin. Allocative efficiency, allocative efficiency is a what's the word? It's more difficult to achieve, and it requires not just that the economy is producing things at the lowest cost, but it's allocating its resources to the production of those goods and services which are the most demanded. When I say the most demanded, I mean on the margin. So I'm going to have to, hopefully this is kind of a review for you guys. You've seen this before. This is microeconomic theory. This is the theorem of welfare economics that says we can achieve efficiency by allocating at the competitive equilibrium, the long run competitive equilibrium across all markets. You may have heard of Adam Smith and the concept of the invisible hand. A lot of people who study economics and go all the way back to the 1700s for their economic philosophy. I mean, that's a little questionable if you should be listening to something that's 250 years old to determine what we do with today's economy, and I generally don't recommend that. But there's a lot of important economic principles in the Scottish Enlightenment that Adam Smith was involved in. And the idea, let me just summarize it for you. I'm not a philosopher by any means. I'm an economist, but I've heard the philosophy. So let me explain the philosophy. It's as if there's an invisible hand of the market guiding resources towards those productive capabilities that are the most valuable to society. And that's driven by a profit motive in the sense that people, if they have some capital, they have some labor, they want to get the most out of it they can, and they choose to allocate it to these resources that will earn them the most money and somebody somewhere in society really demands that thing in order for that to happen. And that this is the case where there is some invisible hand pushing the market toward allocative efficiency. That's really what we're thinking at that point, right? If you are a very progressive person, very liberal, I won't go all the way to, let's say, socialist or communist. I doubt we have any communists in this classroom, at least self-proclaimed, but they would really disagree with this. I would say they would say that should not be the goal of a government, to allow the free hand of the market, the invisible hand of the market, to guide all these resources to particular ways of means of production, because it's sort of fundamentally corrupt, or what's the word, exploitative. You know, the people who have the money are exploiting the people who don't, and have to supply their labor to produce. And anyways, this is more of the Marxist view of economics, if you've ever studied that. And I don't think I'm going to be talking about it in this class. If you want to talk about stuff like that, there are sort of comparative economic classes where you're like, okay, let's compare capitalism and socialism, Marxism, and all this stuff. But you know, I'm really not trained to be teaching you all that stuff. I'm just a regular economist. But it could be interesting. So let's sort of put the Marxism on the side and say, if you are having this goal of economic efficiency, you will see some arguments here that say it's good to let some of the invisible hand of the market, not because you want the rich people to get richer. You know, it's not that you want Jeff Bezos to have $100 billion and let's get him all the way up to $1 trillion, right? You know, go invisible hand of the market so we can have the world's first trillionaire in 10 years. The economics profession doesn't want that. I hope you don't think that we want that. This sort of winner take all version of capitalism that we kind of find ourselves in at times. We're not saying that. We actually are saying there is something good about efficiency. There is something good about providing the goods and services that people actually want. There's an old cartoon about the Soviet Union, and it has like a centralized economy where people just tell the factory workers what, you know, they have the government basically orders a factory to build, you know, 1 million pounds worth of nails. You know, like a hammer and nail, those little, like these things. I happen to have a nail right in mind, right? So imagine somebody in the Soviet Union saying, you have to build 1 million pounds worth of nails. And what they do is they take all the steel they can find and make one giant nail that weighs 1 million pounds. And they say, okay, fine, we did it. You asked it for it, here you go. It's a nail, weighs 1 million pounds. What's the point of that joke is that in this country, nobody would ever do that. No one would ever make something unless they thought somebody out there wanted to buy it, right? You only produce because of the profit motive. You only produce like an iPhone. Why are there people who make iPhones and sell them? It's because there's people who want to buy them. And that's a feature of free market capitalism, that at least you have that. Whereas the more centralized of an economy is, where you have somebody just telling you what to make. You must produce this amount of this, and somebody does it just because they have to. You might be wasting your resources making something that people don't actually want. And that would not be allocatively efficient. You might have productive efficiency in the Soviet Union, but you're not really going to get this allocative efficiency because you don't know exactly what people want. The market helps guide those resources towards what they want. Man, I sound really preachy. I'm not normally this preachy. I just want you to know the definition of allocative efficiency. Sorry about all of the preachiness of the last 5 minutes. Okay, you guys have any questions? Um, oh, I'm not going to have you watch this video. It takes too long. I used to have people watch the video about water running out in Cape Town, South Africa. They had this crisis, really, where they didn't know what to do. And the question is, what would you, what is the fairest thing to do, and what is the most efficient thing to do? Let's say there's just not enough water for everybody. Uh, it's a major town. Millions of people live in Cape Town, South Africa. This was like 2 years ago. So actually, I know what happened. But I'm curious, without watching the video, uh, what would you think is the most efficient thing to do with water? Should they say nobody gets any water for a month? Everyone has to go a month with no water. Or should they raise the price really high so that, it's now costs $1,000 for a gallon of water and only the richest people can afford it? What do you guys think?
I think it needs to be rationed because you can't stop all water because people need to drink.
Okay, so okay, interesting. How do you ration water? Something as important as water.
Like each house has a meter. They can say, okay, this household can only have 500 liters a month, something like that.
And what happens if you go over that?
Oh, you can't. Like it stops. Like you can't.
Okay, so that technology doesn't exist.
Can't the water company shut off your water?
Well, maybe it does. I don't think they could monitor it in real time the way you're suggesting, to say, oh, you've hit your 500 gallons, so we're going to cut you off.
Okay.
It makes, like in the United States, we don't have someone reading our water at all times. They have to come and check your water meter to see how much water you've used. And so that would be very resource intensive. But it's a great point, I guess. I don't know if you guys agree with what Joseph is saying. He's saying, actually take the market out of it. There's no market anymore. It's just a fixed amount of water that everyone gets, right? Here's a question. What about people who really need water more than people who don't?
Wouldn't that be the point of rationing, to prevent material wealth from being able to distort the outcome?
Okay. So you're saying, despite the fact that maybe you're responding to what I said, and let me try to clarify what I was saying, which is, imagine a situation where there's somebody like a hospital. A hospital really needs water to save people's lives. You could imagine that. And then there's another place that's just like a restaurant. It wants to have water, but it doesn't need it. It might just go out of business or something. Or even more, it's like a golf course who just wants the water to spray on its green so that it stays green. We could have somewhere, it would be wrong to give all of that the same amount of water. The golf course, the restaurant, and the hospital, they're sort of increasing in terms of how badly you need it.
Well, I guess ideally, if you were going to take the market out of it and you'd be putting government into it, first off, in regards to enforcement, you'd probably want to create civil penalties for people who go above and beyond water usage, and you'd want to make sure that those civil penalties are high enough that they work effectively as an incentive to actually function the way they're designed to. Second, you'd probably want government, since they're taking control of the situation in this hypothetical scenario, to create almost a tiered system of needs for water. So depending on local industry, if you have like lots of agriculture, you would want to make sure that agriculture is able to continue, because then you would find yourself with a food shortage down the line if you don't ensure that that's there. You'd want to make sure that sanitation and health are provided for adequately, as well as the adequate amount of water people need to survive.
You've really thought about this. Did you just think about this in the last 2 minutes? You came up with all this?
Yeah.
That's impressive. Yeah. So let me summarize what you're saying. You do not want the price of water to go skyrocketing, right?
Well, in this scenario, I mean, if you were to let the free market work, you would inevitably end up with price gouging.
Yes. And you're saying you don't want that?
No, you don't want that. And if we assume, I don't know how South Africa works, but I know at least stateside here, most water utilities are run by essentially monopolies that are state sanctioned. So in that case, in South Africa, then you'd already have most of the leverage you need to implement something.
Yeah, I did. Yeah, so I think John made some great points in this case. That I just finished teaching you about the invisible hand of the market and Adam Smith, and how that free markets guide resources towards where they're the most efficiently allocated. Here's a case where that's like it just can't be right. I mean, does anybody think that's what we should do here? I don't think anyone said yes. Joseph and John both said to use some other type of rationing, not prices.
I don't think prices would be a good idea because water is one of those things. It's not
Yeah,
like electronics. It's
yeah,
vital for life. You can't live more than 3 days without
good.
it.
Also,
So
how about equity? Remember, we economists are allowed to make arguments based on equity. What's fair? What would be the best thing to do if we didn't even know who we were? You know, is sort of take ourselves out of the equation and think about what would be the most fair way to ration or allocate this water, um, given everyone's sort of some stuff they can't control, stuff they can't control. You know, if you're sick, probably, you know, you can't control. If you have cholera and you need fresh water, you can't be drinking the dirty water that's outside your house. You need a pipe that gives you clean water. We can sort of agree that it's fair that that person receive the water. It's not like, well, you shouldn't have got sick. It's your fault for getting sick. You know, use an equity argument when it's appropriate in economics. I'm totally behind you doing that in any of your stuff. And so, sorry, do you want me to tell you what they did? They actually shut off water. They shut off the water in all the homes because they couldn't monitor it as well. But they came up with these places where you could fill up water. So the government actually did get really involved with supplying people with water, but they did have to shut it down. And after a while, the water resources came back up so that they could shut the water back on. So it was a temporary thing that they had to do to basically to avoid an even worse crisis. They created a situation where people had to, you know, line up for water, and then that's how they monitored that everyone got the right amount. You know, you were there, you had to wait in line, and somehow they sort of made sure they did ration. They rationed it, and of course they prioritized the hospitals and people who needed it the most. But here's a case where prices doesn't really work, and I'm glad we sort of all agreed on that. So
I have a question.
sure.
So for like bathrooms and stuff, can't you just use the salt water?
I don't know.
Like for toilets and
Yeah,
stuff that need fresh water?
I think like drinkable water might be different than other water.
Okay.
Do we know if South Africa invested in desalination plants after this to turn ocean
I
water
don't.
into?
You guys can look this up. Just look at water shortage in Cape Town. It was a big story like 2 years ago. It's not a big story anymore because it's almost a miracle that they solved it without another sort of humanitarian crisis happening. You know, there was some solidarity of the people that lived there. I think Tony said something like everyone should just move out. There's people who can't do that. There's people who can't afford to pick up all their belongings. And I mean, unless they want to become a refugee. And in fact, there are parts of the world where people are economic refugees, where they just can't live in a certain place anymore. But I don't think South Africa became one of those. We should go on. Thanks for the discussion, though. I appreciate it. Sort of we talked about this, but let me be a little more clear what a Kaldor-Hicks improvement is. The Kaldor-Hicks improvement is in a case where the winners in theory could compensate the losers. And I want to think of I want a good example of this. What if it was a trade agreement between the United States and Mexico? And the trade agreement is we're going to lower the barriers for manufacturing automobiles, like NAFTA, something like this, where if you are an auto manufacturer in the United States, that deal hurts you. You maybe you were able to make $1 million of profit every year by building cars in this country, and now because they can do it cheaper in Mexico, you lost that $1 million worth of profit is just gone. You would be pretty angry, wouldn't you? Especially if you made an investment of your own money, and you were planning to build cars in this country, and then a free trade agreement comes along and says, well, you can build the same stuff for cheaper in Mexico, and we're going to eliminate all the barriers between trade, so everybody's going to hire from those guys instead of you. You can't say that that's a Pareto improvement, because those manufacturers in the US are damaged. So let's think of this other concept, which is called Kaldor-Hicks improvement. That means even though there's this guy in Texas who lost $1 million worth of profit, there could be other people somewhere in the country who are benefiting from this. They're benefiting. Why? Because they can get lower costs. They lower prices for all of the materials that they get. They can save money on other things, and they can basically, consumers can buy cars for cheaper. Maybe Mexico is also buying more of our products, like Mexico is buying our I know cattle is a big thing America has, and airplanes, and we manufacture a lot of stuff still in this country, but surely there are some industries who are also benefiting from this. This concept is that says we can still call that an improvement, assuming that you have to talk about the sizes, the size of the benefit to the people who are winning, even adding up everybody in the country who gets a lower price on their car. If you only have to spend $20,000 on your car instead of $22,000, the exact same car now costs $20,000 instead of $22,000. That's like saving you $2,000. That's a big benefit to you. You could use that $2,000 somewhere else to buy more goods and services for yourself. So that's my example of a Kaldor-Hicks improvement. And then a Kaldor-Hicks efficiency is when you've gotten to a point where there's no further Kaldor-Hicks improvements possible. So actually, this is really hard to achieve. I would venture to say that no economy has ever achieved Kaldor-Hicks efficiency. You know why I would say that? There's always something you could do differently. You'd have to have just the perfect economy, wouldn't you? Where there's no different, like build a bigger factory in North Carolina and a smaller factory in Virginia, or anyways, there's too many moving parts. I just want you to be aware of this concept, the Kaldor-Hicks improvement and efficiency, to contrast with Pareto improvement and Pareto efficiency, which is there's no losers in a Pareto improvement, and there's no Pareto improvements possible to get Kaldor-Hicks efficiency. I'm sorry, John, you've been waiting patiently. What's your comment?
I guess I'm just trying to understand what the Kaldor-Hicks is relative to the Pareto.
Sure.
Would the Kaldor-Hicks be an argument that someone would level if they're saying, like, for example, in like a free trade agreement that allows labor to move to more low-cost areas, and that depresses average wages across the entire zone? Would a Kaldor-Hicks efficiency or a Kaldor-Hicks improvement be the argument for saying that that's not necessarily a bad thing? Not that I agree with that argument, but would that be the kind of argument that you would be making in that situation?
If the winners could compensate the losers, then yes. If they couldn't, what if let's say there's a different free trade agreement that actually is so bad for the people who lose their jobs, and like you said, the wages of everybody in that sector goes down, and whatever benefits they get whatever benefits the United States gets from this agreement is not enough to compensate for those losses, then it's not a Kaldor-Hicks improvement. And it's you can make an economic argument that that's a bad deal. You shouldn't do that, right? So I'm not always saying that every deal and every change that anybody has ever made would constitute a Kaldor-Hicks improvement. It crucially depends on whether the winners could compensate the losers. They don't actually have to compensate the losers, but they have to, in theory, be able to compensate them. Does that make sense?
So it's measuring like totals of surplus in the market?
Yeah, it's measuring. Well, so how would you go about compensating somebody? Usually it's with dollars. Right? I mean, of course, we used to barter things all the time, like, oh, I'll give you this sheep if you give me a barrel of something. But now you should just think of it in terms of dollars. Think of all the people whose wages went down and how much money that they would need to be paid in order to be indifferent between what happened to them and what if it hadn't happened to them. And then think of all the people who benefited and how much money they would be willing to give in order to be indifferent between having that thing happen or not. That's one way to measure it. And that's certainly not perfect because of the value of money is different to different people.
So it's kind of like a relative measure then?
Yeah,
almost?
I mean, yeah.
Okay, thank you.
It's very theoretical, you know. I'm not even saying that you should use this when you do your papers. When you do your papers, you're not going to like calculate every benefit from it to everything and then calculate all the costs and then compare them. That's sort of too hypothetical, really, that you shouldn't be doing that. But I just want to contrast that with Pareto improvement.
Could I ask a question?
Yeah.
Is Kaldor-Hicks improvement similar to the idea of utilitarianism or like the
utilitarian? I think so. Utilitarianism is you should do the thing that maximizes people's the aggregate utility of everybody in the society. And if you believe that, then you should also believe here that anything that's a Kaldor-Hicks improvement you should do.
Okay.
I think there's also an issue of fairness here, of equity. Just because you can do something doesn't mean you should. You should always be thinking about what are the equity implications of what you do. Who is going to be hurt, right? What if the people who already are just so poor are being hurt even more by your policy? I would say that matters too. That's something you should factor into the situation.
Okay, thank you.
Or at least you're allowed to. You know, I'm not going to tell you how to make your arguments about equity, but you're allowed to include fairness, fairness of opportunity, that sort of thing in your arguments.
Yes.
We already talked about supply and demand and competitive equilibrium. I think we were up to market failure last class, but and I do think I was going to have something like that on my quiz. I had a list of things that I was going to put on my quiz. Where did I go? Okay, here's something. So let me list the things that could be on quiz 1. Talking about allocative and productive efficiency, talking about how governments allocate things efficiently, competitive equilibrium, and market failures. That's this. What the concept of equity means for arguing for something. What a Pareto improvement is, what a Kaldor-Hicks improvement is, and 3 other things that we haven't done yet. So the next thing here is a market failure I want to talk about. And that is, how much have I already talked about market failures?
I think we barely touched it.
We just touched it. I got to externalities at least?
I don't have any notes on
okay.
Asymmetry, lack of competition, or externalities.
Yeah. Oh, okay. Well, let me talk about that now. I might actually want to do. It'd be great if we in real life I would use the blackboard and draw that way, but I want to do my supply and demand curve and to talk about competitive equilibrium. Let's say what color the supply curve is red, and the demand curve, let's say, is blue. Supply curve is upward sloping, demand curve is downward sloping. Right? You should know that much. What else do we have here? This point where they intersect is special because it is the competitive equilibrium, price and quantity. Notice here that I'm only talking about one good, aren't I? It's like you can't even draw. You can try to. You can, if you're a macroeconomist, you can try to. But let's stick to microeconomics here and say this is the price of some good on the x-axis, and this is the quantity of some good on the x-axis. Price on the y, quantity on the x. And this point is special because it's a competitive equilibrium. What makes it so special is actually that this region here. How do I draw in a region? I don't know how to do that, but you know, I'll just sort of I'll scribble on it maybe. This sort of region that I'm scribbling on here. Oh, that's terrible. Undo. I don't know how to highlight a region here, but maybe just diagonal lines. Sorry. I'm trying to indicate that this is an area now, not just a line. That area is everything below the demand curve and above the supply curve. That represents in some way the benefit to society for this trade having occurred. What do I mean by that? Well, the demand curve, yes, there's this one black point in the middle here, but all these other points above the equilibrium represent how badly people wanted this thing. Let's say this is iPhones, right? Let's say this is the market for iPhones. And the blue line represents the demand for iPhones. The fact that it goes all the way up here means that there's people out there who really, really wanted an iPhone. They only had to pay this price for it. I should call that P star. They had to pay P star for the iPhone, but their demand for it was way up here. And that difference is called economic surplus or trade surplus or consumer surplus, if I'm talking about up here. And what about the supply curve? Down here, they're producing phones. This totally doesn't make sense because Apple's the only producer of iPhones. Maybe I should have said generally smartphones rather than the one product. But these are all of the people who are. What is the supply curve? The supply curve is essentially the cost, the marginal cost of producing each unit is what is you can see on the supply curve. And the fact that the marginal cost of producing this unit was all the way down here, yet they were able to sell it up here for P star, means that this producer is enjoying some producer surplus on that. And the fact that of all the P stars and Q stars that are possible in this market, the one that represents the competitive equilibrium is the one which maximizes this area. It is this idea of the first fundamental theorem of welfare economics. That's it. That's the point that maximizes trade surplus and consumer welfare and total welfare. However, what if there's a market failure? What does it mean for a market failure? It means it's not getting there. Something's happening. The market isn't maximizing trade surplus, which we can think of as sort of benefit to society, total benefit to society for this market and the existence of this market. That's how you should think of a market failure. It doesn't mean there's no market at all. The market is doing nothing. It means it's choosing a different price and a different quantity in some way that makes it not efficient. So let me talk first about externalities. What is an externality? The easiest one to think of is pollution. You guys are familiar with pollution, right? What causes pollution? Let's talk about the type of pollution that's caused because of manufacturing, because of production.
CO2.
CO2 is a form of pollution, you think? Yeah. You know, I don't even care if we pick a specific thing. All I really want to think about is something which imposes a cost on every other people in society. That's what this term negative externality refers to. A negative externality is something which imposes a cost on a third party. There's a transaction between a first party and a second party, but there's a third party who's being affected in a negative way. That's called a negative externality. The word externality means it's external to the trade. You and I are trading, but there's somebody else external to the trade who's suffering a cost. That's called an externality. What I want to do is look at this graph with the externality added. How would you add an externality? Some of you have seen this before. You go ahead and tell me if you want. How would I remember here? Just this is the S for supply curve. This is the D for demand curve. Let's say by producing a good, this good, it causes a per unit externality of, I don't know, $10 per unit. Every unit that's produced causes an extra $10 of externality cost on somebody in the world. How would I think about that in terms of this graph? Any ideas? There's going to be a shift of a curve. Which curve and shifting how? There's only two curves, a supply curve and a demand curve. There's only two ways to shift, up or down.
Shift the supply curve up.
Shift the supply curve up is what John says. You guys agree?
Yes.
I agree too. And I'm the instructor, so it's got to be right. Yeah. So you're right, given what I said. But it's not just that that the actual supply curve shifts. It's that we could think of it as a different type of supply curve, not the actual supply curve of the businesses who are selling this thing for a profit. Instead, we think of it as the social cost of this thing, right? So the social cost includes, the red curve is like the private costs of the thing, but let's make a new color. How about dark red? Ooh, because it's dark. And if it's $10, it's oops, I kind of wanted to do a line here. Right here, okay? So this darker red line, it's not the new private supply curve. In fact, the companies, they don't care, right? They're causing negative externality, but their goal is still just to make as much profit as you can. So as far as they're concerned, the light red line is the true supply curve. Rather, this dark red line represents what you might call a social cost curve, which doesn't mean social like socialism. It means the total costs that are imposed on society is represented by this dark red. So, and sometimes you might see that like as an S prime or something. Or maybe well, I'll just call it S prime. S prime. So S prime is the supply curve, but it's including the negative externality that's caused by this particular good. Now let's think about, is P star and Q star, this competitive equilibrium point, is that the most efficient thing for society or not? Clearly not. John's shaking his head no. Why not? It still maximizes this shaded triangle area, but I think you know. You can go ahead and answer if you want.
I mean, is that because this model doesn't incorporate the cost of the negative externality?
Yeah, so the black shaded area doesn't, but the dark red line does. So the true benefit to, so let me take a step back here that says, I'm not saying just because something causes pollution, you shouldn't produce it at all. We shouldn't have the government say, let's ban the production of these widgets. This is a widget which causes a production, causes pollution. So we're going to say no more widgets are allowed to be produced. If the government did that, they would really be doing the economy a disservice. Because look, remember this blue line represents how badly people want this good, how much benefit they get from it. This dark red line represents the total cost to society for having produced this good. That includes the private costs of the firm to make it and the social costs of the pollution that's added because of it. So the true area that matters, the area that we want to, I'm going to try to do another shading with a different color here. How about green? This way. It's this triangle here that really matters in terms of like, what should a government be promoting? What does a government want? It wants this efficiency. It wants this allocative efficiency, but it should include externalities, because after all, the people who are suffering the externality are part of society. We should care about them too. So actually this point right here is the socially optimal point. I think that's what it's often called, or social efficiency, socially optimal. Okay, that's socially optimal. What's it called? Allocation. Like that. Oops. Oh no. Oh well. I ran into my S prime, but that's I can do a little arrow here. Right there, it's a socially optimal allocation. Just as a reminder, oops. This is a little weird to work with. The competitive equilibrium hasn't changed. It's still the same, right? I don't want you to think, okay, we have a new competitive equilibrium. Actually, we don't. Competitive equilibrium is still that point. I wish it was black. Maybe it'll change. Nope, it won't change. But this is a market failure. The whole point of this was to teach you about market failures and negative externalities. It's a market failure because the competitive equilibrium is here, and that's not the place that's most efficient. The most efficient place is the socially optimal allocation here, where S prime meets the demand curve D. Because we should factor in the negative externalities that are imposed. So how can a government achieve the green dot instead of the black dot? You guys have any ideas? What's one way the government can achieve this?
Per unit pollution tax.
Yeah, a tax is. So if you have a tax that's exactly equal to the distance between the dark red and the light red line, so you have to get the right tax. Don't just make any old tax. But if you quantify your tax, it has to be a per unit tax too, doesn't it? It can't just be a flat tax. What would happen if this, like, let's say you made all the firms just pay a flat tax, and then they could enter the market? What would happen? It wouldn't change. We would still be at the competitive equilibrium. The firms would be grumpy about it because they lose some of their profits, but they would still produce right here at the black dot, because on the margin, their incentives are aligned with this red line because of the marginal cost, I should say, right? So if you make them pay a fixed cost, but don't change their marginal costs, firms will still produce at this black dot. That's just a result of economic theory. However, if you make firms pay a per unit, Q is this axis, per quantity, basically the more they produce, the more tax they pay, then their incentives will shift to align with S prime, and you will, in theory, you should get this green socially optimal point. Okay, and that is one way of, the word is internalizing the externality. The goal of government in the case of a market failure, externality, is to internalize the externality by charging the polluting firm a per unit tax equal to the size of the negative externality they cause. If they can do that, they will have successfully internalized the externality. It's weird though, that's not the only way to internalize an externality. There are some other ways, but I think that's the easiest way to understand and at least to draw, even though I didn't draw it with all my squiggly lines here. But I think, I mean, you guys have any other questions? Have any questions about like what I've drawn? It's not the best drawing in the world, but hopefully you see the difference between S and S prime, and you see the difference between the black dot and the green dot. The black dot maximizes the black area shaded in, but the green dot maximizes the green shaded area. Right. Let's just stop sharing here. Is there anything else I want to say about this graph? I don't know. Not really. 2:58. What does that mean? We have 15 more minutes? Yeah, I don't think we're not going to have the quiz. We're not going to have the quiz on Thursday. It's just too many more things I want to do. Plus, I want to have the draft. You guys are all pro draft, so we'll have the draft maybe Thursday. But let's finish up these slides I have about basic tools. Let's do that right now. Well, I'm not going to finish it now, but I'm going to continue it right now. Where do I get that? Share screen. This one I have to share. A lot of things on my. Okay. Slideshow, maybe from current slide. Sorry, guys. It's weird. There we go. Some causes are externality, a cost or benefit received by a third party. Let's jump down to here, a case for intervention. You can try to internalize the externality with taxes. That's what we were saying before. Oh, by the way, there's a name for this type of tax. I don't know why I didn't write it on here. Didn't write it. Oops. Maybe I thought you didn't need to know it. But it's named after an economist named Pigou or Pigou, and it's a Pigouvian tax. That is, if the tax is aligned perfectly with the negative externality, it's called a Pigouvian tax. There's another way though, and that is by establishing property rights using something called the Coase theorem. There's another economist called Ronald Coase who has a theorem about internalizing externalities to restore efficiency by giving people property rights. Everyone who's affected by this, give them a property right. It doesn't work so well with pollution. You can't do this with pollution, right? Because there's too many people affected. But what if you had a smaller example with, like you and a neighbor, right? You live in a place where there's one person next to you, and this neighbor does something like really loud at night sometimes, but he has an economic incentive to do this. Like his job is welding, and it makes a really loud sound of, and he earns his living doing this, but it's really annoying to you. You hate hearing this loud noise. The Coase theorem says, even though you're suffering this negative externality, and maybe it's not clear, does this guy have the right to make this really loud noise whenever he wants, or just during certain hours? And what should the police do about it? If you call the police and you say, it's really annoying, I guess this is why we have zoning laws. Right? So the government has thought of this and said, okay, we'll have zoning laws about what you can do where. But before the days of zoning laws, you could imagine this negative externality of noise happening, despite the fact that it's profitable for the guy to make the noise. What the Coase theorem is, C-O-A-S-E, Coase theorem says, if you negotiate together with the other person, starting from a point where property rights are well established, everybody knows exactly, like, let's say the rule is 9 p.m., you know, before 9 p.m., he has the right to make as much noise as he wants. After 9 p.m., you have the right to insist that he doesn't make the noise. It actually doesn't matter if you choose 9 p.m. or 10 p.m. or 8 p.m. or anything. As long as they're well established, then the two parties can negotiate right up to the point where it's in exactly both of their interests to find, like, he might actually say, okay, I'll give you $5 per hour of me making this noise. And you'll say, is that really worth it? Okay. And you get to this level where you both agree it's worth it for you to let him make this noise for $5 per hour. And it's worth it for him because he makes more money by doing that. And that's basically the idea. I mean, he more or less won a Nobel Prize for his work on transaction costs and this sort of externality stuff. But it really just boils down to that. It is, as long as everybody knows exactly what they have the right to in their sides of the negotiation, this works for businesses too, not just individuals, then there's some sort of free market reason that you would expect the most efficient amount of noise production to happen. You know, there could be some months where he doesn't want to do it after 9 p.m. at all. And then there could be some times of the year where he's really busy and he rings your doorbell and says, okay, I need to work after 9 p.m. How about $10 per hour? You know, it seems weird because most neighbors, you don't have a money relationship with them. You just try to be nice with your neighbor. So forget about that. Imagine these are businesses and they just care about profits or something like that. Now you can see how the Coase theorem makes some sense. Any questions about that? Okay. Yeah, I kind of like talking about this stuff sometimes. You can tell. Okay, do I want to go into these other two ones? Asymmetric information, I don't want to spend too much time talking about it. But it is a form of market failure that comes from the fact, not that there isn't enough information, but certain people may have access to information that other people don't. And because of that, let's say I have a used car and I know that it's worth $5,000 to you. I've evaluated the car. I can tell it's worth $5,000 to you. But you look at the car and think, actually, it might be a lemon. If this market actually, if the car doesn't actually do, or it has some parts that, I can't tell. I can't inspect the car, but I just know that there could be some parts in it that are faulty and it's only going to be worth $1,000 to me. But to the used car salesman, it's worth more than $1,000. So I'm not willing to go all the way down to 1,000 for the price. But you aren't willing to go all the way up to 5,000 either, because you just don't believe me that it's actually worth that much. And that asymmetric information can cause a market failure because, the idea of a free market is that anytime there's a trade that's beneficial to both parties, it should happen. But in the case of this used car, it would be beneficial. You actually could use the car more than me, the salesman. To me, it's only worth 2,000. In terms of the next other person I could sell it to, it's worth 2,000. And to you, it's worth 5,000. Look at all that trade surplus. That's $3,000 worth of trade surplus that could occur if we were both equally informed about the quality of the car. In other words, maybe I was uncertain about it, but you're just as uncertain. And we both, using our best guess, think that the car is worth the same, then this wouldn't happen. But because of the asymmetry, I know more than you, and you're sort of afraid to deal with me, knowing that I know more than you, that I could be tricking you. There's no way for you to tell. That is another form of market failure. I don't think we'll talk about too much in this case. I guess in healthcare, maybe this will come up a little bit. People may know who's healthy and who isn't better then the insurance. There's what's called, you know, adverse selection. It's not the same, but we'll definitely talk about that in healthcare.
I have a question.
Sure, go ahead, Joseph.
Would insider trading be considered asymmetric information?
Yeah, sort of, right? If I'm making a trade with you and I have information that's asymmetric that you don't have available to you, that is a form of that could be a market failure too, even if I'm afraid that you have more information than I do. And in fact, that's what the SEC, the Securities and Exchange, what's the C? Securities and Exchange Commission, what they really care about when they get people for insider trading, it's not that, oh, you made some money and I hate the fact that you made some money, I'm going to punish you for it. It's really about the fear of that spreading to other people, or that no one will be willing to engage in this transaction because they think they might be dealing with somebody who has insider information. So yeah, I would say that's a form of market failure. How would the government try to improve a situation with asymmetric information?
Penalties.
Penalties, okay. How about, let's go back to the used car thing. What could they do for that?
Required labeling.
Acquire what?
Labeling. Like
labeling.
If you're in a car, you have to disclose everything in that car or everything that's wrong with it.
Sure. Sometimes there are these laws in the book they're literally called lemon laws. You have these in Virginia? I don't know if you do. In Florida, they do. There's something literally called a lemon law. And that says if you buy a car and then after you buy the car, you find out there was something wrong with it that wasn't disclosed at the time of the purchase, then you have the right to get your money back on that car. And this takes away the dealer's incentive in the first place to mislead you about the car. And so that's one way governments can try to overcome any effect of asymmetric information. Okay, and we're getting low on time. How about the last one that I have on this slide? And that is, oops. Oh, I can't see what I'm doing. The lack of competition. That's an easy one, right? Monopolies. Why are monopolies bad? If I new share, if I go to the whiteboard, will it give me that same thing? Yeah, it's still here on the whiteboard. What happens with the monopoly? I don't know if I can make all this. What if I undo everything? Well, I can undo a lot. Oh, each one of these lines is a separate thing to undo. Darn. Okay.
There's no competition, thus prices will rise and quality of the product will decrease.
No competition. So you said the quality of the product or quantity?
Yeah, like there's less incentive to have a quality product, so they raise the prices and the quality of the product goes down because you don't have any other choice but to get that product.
Okay. I definitely agree with the prices.
There are certain companies.
You're raising the
There are certain companies though, like that, like raw materials, for example, like the De Beers company, the diamond company, where they have a monopoly on diamonds in general, but that one, is that really the quality of a product? Those are just diamonds.
Yeah, so let's leave aside this issue of there could be some quality, less competition might make you less concerned about the quality of a product, but that's hard to quantify. And as an economics professor, I'd rather not deal with that. Let me relabel this curve as the marginal cost curve of a firm. So here we have demand and we have marginal cost of a firm. But now let's say this is a monopoly. If this is a monopoly, are they going to choose P star and Q star equal to this point here where it intersects the demand curve? No. You guys remember what they do? You remember this is micro. What do I need to draw here? I need to actually, I'm going to leave the red line. I'm going to change the blue line now. I'm going to change the blue line to, I don't know, a light blue, maybe a darker blue, to something like this. And that is what is known as the marginal revenue curve, right? The marginal revenue curve is this dark blue line. And, oh, no, just draw it with some black dots here. So what does the monopolist do? This right here is the price that it chooses, right there. So we'll call that not P star, but something like PM, superscript M. So this point PM is the monopolist's profit maximizing price. So actually this square here this square here is what they get in profit. They're more concerned about maximizing their own profits, that they're willing to charge a higher price and a lower quantity. They're gonna provide a smaller quantity of this good, and we can easily see why that's not efficient. It's not efficient if a monopoly is the only seller of a good, because then only I should say this. There's too much to draw on one thing, but this region right here is obtained in terms of trade surplus, but this other region, I'm running out of colors and everything. This region right here, what's that called? I'll give you the initials. D W L.
Deadweight.
Deadweight what? What's the L?
Loss.
Yeah, it's a deadweight loss. So this is, I'm trying to redraw this picture that you've seen from microeconomics, but if there's a monopolist, yes, you get this pink lavender area of trade surplus, but you lose out on this orange triangle of deadweight loss. And that's why monopolists are actually bad for society, all else equal. All else equal, monopolists are bad for society because we don't get as much trade surplus as we otherwise would. So the case for intervention for monopolists is, of course, try to stop them from happening, right? Try to stop mergers. If two firms that already control a lot of a market want to merge to get bigger and merge to get bigger until they become a monopolist, that could be bad. So governments will step in and say, hey, there's too much concentration in this market, and we don't want you to form a monopoly. And in fact, sometimes they break up monopolies because of this. So that's another form of market failure, actually. I've told you about 3 forms of market failure: externalities, asymmetric information, and monopolies. Those are all ways that the efficient level that isn't achieved. Sorry if I'm spending a lot of time on this, guys. Thank you for staying with me. I think we'll get to some like real issues later. Right now, we haven't really talked about issues. I talked about the Cape Town issue. That's one issue, but we'll be involved with this on Thursday, and there's not going to be a quiz on Thursday. Next quiz will be Tuesday the 9th. You guys have any comments or questions? And of course, you have no homework either until the first debate. When we have our debate, then the 2 people who will be debating, of course, they have a lot of work to do, but they don't have homework. Everybody else has to tell me which side of the debate they would support and give me at least 2 economic arguments for why they support that idea, that side. So, I'll help you in class, but if nothing in class really gave you an opinion, you can do some research on your own to say, here's what I think we should do in this particular case. I'm curious to see what you guys have to say about our stuff. But that will be during our first debate, which is also at least a week from now. Perhaps the Thursday of next week. Is that right? I think that's what I have. But I'll let you guys know. Um,